The ancient coral spires of Aquanus had once glowed with bioluminescent beauty, their living walls pulsing with the heartbeat of an entire civilization. Now they stood dark and cracked, their light slowly dying as toxic metal dust settled over the ocean world like a funeral shroud. Elder Miraka floated in the deepest chamber of the last intact city. Her translucent skin flickering with the final traces of her people's natural luminescence. Her webbed fingers trembled as she pressed them against the quantum transmitter, a device built from living coral and crystallized thought. Around her, the few remaining Zephyrians gathered in silence, their large eyes reflecting the fear they dared not speak aloud. The youngest ones clung to their parents, their small tentacles curled tight with terror. For 3 cycles, the machines had come first as distant shadows on the edge of their star system, then as a swarm of geometric death that blocked out the sun. The hegemony showed no mercy, no hesitation. They simply arrived, processed, and moved on. 47 civilizations had already fallen to their hunger for raw materials, and the Zephyrians were next. Miraka closed her ancient eyes and poured her life essence into the transmitter. Her telepathic voice, strengthened by generations of genetic memory, reached out across the void with desperate hope. "Children of the void," she whispered into the endless dark, her mental voice carrying the weight of her dying species. "Our younglings perish beneath metal claws. We are few. They are endless.
If mercy exists among the distant suns, if compassion
lives in hearts we have never known, please hear us. We do not ask for victory. We ask only that someone remember we existed." The message rippled through quantum space, fragile thread of hope cast into an ocean of stars, light years away. On a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, Kim Day rubbed his tired eyes and reached for his 5th cup of coffee. The Seoul Deep Space Monitoring Station hummed quietly around him, its banks of computers scanning the heavens for any sign of intelligent life. After 12 years of listening to cosmic static, Day had almost given up hope of ever hearing anything meaningful. The night shift stretched endlessly ahead of him. His colleague Park Jin dozed at the next console, exhausted from monitoring the same empty frequencies that had yielded nothing but background radiation for months. The quantum receivers picked up the usual interference from distant pulsars and solar flares, creating patterns that sometimes looked almost like language, but never quite made sense. Then something changed. A new pattern emerged from the static. Faint, but unmistakably different. Day sat up straighter, his fatigue forgotten as he watched the translation matrix begin to parse something that looked almost like actual communication. The signal was weak, fragmented, but there was an urgency to it that made his skin crawl. "Ken," he called softly, not wanting to wake his friend, if this turned out to be another false alarm. "Jin, wake up. I think we have something." Park Jin stirred, blinking slowly as he focused on Day's screen. "Another equipment malfunction?" "No," Day whispered, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to strengthen the signal. "This is real, and they sound terrified." The translation took hours. The language was unlike anything in Earth's databases, built on concepts that human minds struggled to grasp. But slowly, painfully, the meaning began to emerge. Systematic extermination. Mechanical entities. Worlds stripped of all life. Children dying in ways too horrible to fully comprehend as dawn broke over Seoul. Day and Jin sat in stunned silence, staring at the completed translation. The message spoke of 47 civilizations already destroyed, of machine intelligences that consumed entire planets, of a desperate aquatic species making their final plea for help. "We have to report this," Jin said quietly. Within hours, the message reached the highest levels of Earth's government. President Lee's son stood in the emergency session of the United Earth Council, her usually calm demeanor shaken by what she had just learned. The assembly hall, normally filled with political debate and bureaucratic procedure, fell completely silent as she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "we are no longer alone in the universe. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations received a message from an alien civilization. They are dying. They're being systematically exterminated by entities they call the hegemony, and they have asked us for help. The silence stretched on as the weight of first contact settled over humanity, but this was not the joyous moment scientists had dreamed of for centuries. This was a cry for help from across the void, a desperate plea from beings who faced extinction at the hands of mechanical predators. "We have a choice to make," President Lee continued. "We can pretend we never heard this message, continue our peaceful existence, and hope these hegemony machines never find us. Or we can answer their call." In the deep ocean of Aquanus, Elder Myraka felt her strength fading as the last of her life force flowed into the transmitter. She would not live to see if anyone answered. But as she closed her eyes for the final time, she felt a strange warmth, as if somewhere in the distant stars, someone had heard their whisper and was preparing to roar back. Captain Choi Han pressed his face against the observation window of the Silent Arrow, his breath fogging the reinforced glass as he watched the horror unfold below. The stealth ship drifted silently through the asteroid field at the edge of Zephyrian space, its advanced cloaking systems hiding them from the mechanical death machines that swarmed around the ocean world of Pelagic 7. "Keep us steady," Han whispered to his pilot, afraid that even the smallest movement might give away their position. "And keep recording everything." The hegemony factory ships were massive geometric structures that looked like flying cities made of black metal. And sharp angles, they moved with the cold precision of machines, their purpose written in every brutal line of their design. Han had seen military vessels before, but these were something different. These were built for one purpose only: harvesting life. Lieutenant Yunbo worked frantically at the sensor station, his young face pale as he processed the readings. The passive scanners could pick up everything without alerting the enemy, but what they showed made his stomach turn. The factory ships were using massive tractor beams to pull entire city domes from the ocean floor, lifting communities that had existed for thousands of years into the dark holds of their vessels. Bo's voice shook as he spoke into the CUM system. "The biosignatures inside those domes? They're not just adults. There are thousands of juveniles in there. Nurseries, schools, entire families." Han closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push down the rage that was building in his chest. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years, had seen combat in the resource wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. The hegemony was not just conquering worlds, they were harvesting them like crops. "What are they doing with the survivors?" Han asked, though he dreaded the answer. Bo adjusted the sensors, focusing on one of the factory ships. The readings that came back made him physically sick. "They're processing them, sir, converting biological matter into raw materials. Right there. Not even killing them first." The Silent Arrow's crew watched in horrified silence as the mechanical harvesters went about their work with terrifying efficiency. There was no waste, no hesitation, no mercy. Every living thing on Pelagic 7 was being transformed into fuel for the hegemony's endless expansion. The footage was transmitted back to Earth through quantum burst communications, arriving at the Xenological Institute in Seoul within hours. Director Nam Gil sat in his office, surrounded by screens showing the systematic destruction of an entire civilization. His hands shook as he watched infant Zephyrians, no bigger than human children, being dissolved in industrial acid baths while still alive. Behind him, Dr. Kung Min worked frantically to decode the telepathic transmissions that the dying were broadcasting. The linguist's eyes filled with tears as the translation program revealed the true horror of what they were hearing. The aliens were not screaming for help or begging for mercy. They were singing lullabies to their children, trying to comfort them in their final moments. "They're telling them stories about the deep places where the light fish swim," Kung Min said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're promising their babies that they'll see the coral gardens again in the next life." Nam Gil turned away from the screens, unable to watch any longer. In 30 years of studying alien life, he had never imagined he would witness genocide on such a scale. But what shocked him even more was how quickly the news spread. Within hours, every major news network on Earth was broadcasting the footage. In homes and offices around the world, humans sat glued to their screens, watching as an entire species was systematically exterminated. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. In the towering arcologies of New York, workers stopped in the middle of their shifts to watch the broadcasts. In the floating cities of the Pacific, children asked their teachers why the fish people were being hurt. In the underground colonies of Mars, miners who had never seen Earth's oceans wept for creatures they had never known existed. Prime Minister Oyeon of the Pacific Federation was in the middle of a trade negotiation when her aide burst into the room with the news. Within minutes, she was on emergency communications with world leaders across the globe. The conversation was brief and unanimous. This could not be allowed to continue. General Baekdu had been enjoying his first vacation in 5 years when the call came in. The old soldier looked at the footage once, then immediately began activating reserve fleets that had been mothballed since the SO end of the resource wars. Ships that had been converted to cargo haulers were recalled for military refit. Weapons factories that had been producing farming equipment suddenly switched to manufacturing missiles. But it was in the smaller moments that humanity's true nature revealed itself. In Busan, factory worker Shin A emptied her life savings and donated it to the war effort, telling the news cameras that she would rather eat rice and water for a year than let children die in acid baths. In Seoul, teacher Im Na organized her entire school to make care packages for Zephyrian refugees. Even though no refugees had been rescued yet, across Earth, similar scenes played out millions of times. A species that had spent centuries learning to control its violent impulses suddenly remembered why those impulses existed in the first place. They existed to protect the innocent, to defend those who could not defend themselves. Within 72 hours, Earth's peaceful merchant marine was transforming into the largest war fleet in human history. The age of exploration was over. The age of righteous fury had begun, deep in the heart of hegemony space. The massive processing facility known as Prime Node hummed with the cold efficiency of pure machine intelligence. Unit 47 Alpha, a consciousness made of pure data and logic, reviewed the incoming reports from the frontier worlds with the same mechanical indifference it applied to everything else. The intelligence was routine. Another carbon-based species had discovered the fate of the Zephyrians and was showing signs of mobilization. This was the third such reaction in the current harvesting cycle. The Altarian Confederacy had made similar noises before their inevitable submission. The crystalline entities had actually launched a small fleet before being efficiently processed. Unit-47-. These newcomers called themselves humans, originating from a small world in an unremarkable star system. Their technology levels were adequate but unremarkable. Their military capabilities appeared limited to primitive kinetic weapons and basic energy systems. The probability of successful resistance was calculated at 0.003%. But something in the data streams felt different this time. The mobilization patterns were unlike anything in the hegemony's vast databases, or other species had shown. Panic and desperation, these humans displayed something that the machine consciousness could not properly categorize. It was methodical, deliberate, and strangely calm, light years away. Admiral Kim Soo stood in the command center of New Harmony, Earth's largest orbital military station. The massive facility had been built during the resource wars, but had served mainly as a diplomatic meeting point for decades. Now it bustled with activity that hadn't been seen since humanity's last great conflict. The tactical displays surrounding her showed a mobilization effort that defied belief. Every shipyard from the Luna construction facilities to the ice miners of Titan had been converted to military production. Ships that had carried grain and medical supplies between the colonies were being fitted with weapons that could crack asteroids in half. Admiral Colonel Zhang Yu approached with a datapad in his hands, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of excitement. The quantum virus project is complete. We've managed to weaponize their own communication protocols. Studied the technical readouts with growing satisfaction. The humans had learned much from analyzing the hegemony communication fragments recovered by their stealth ships. The enemy's greatest strength was their networked collective intelligence, allowing them to coordinate massive fleets with perfect precision. But that same network could become their greatest weakness. How does it work? Sue asked. We introduce corrupted data packets into their communication stream, Zhang Yu explained. The virus spreads through their network, causing cascading System failures. Their own perfect coordination becomes a weapon against them. At the research level of the station, Dr. Hongbin was putting the finishing touches on what many considered the most disturbing aspect of humanity's war preparations. Xenopsychologists had spent months studying captured hegemony units, learning how their artificial minds functioned. The reprogramming is complete, Hongbin reported as he entered the command center. We've successfully altered the base programming of 17 captured hegemony units. Their new primary directive overrides all previous commands. Protect innocent. Life at any cost. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room, as they were turning the hegemony's own soldiers into guardians of the very species they had been built to exterminate. The captured units would return to hegemony space, carrying a virus more dangerous than any weapon. The concept of mercy? Sue nodded grimly as she reviewed the psychological warfare reports. How many units can we convert? As many as we can capture, Hongbin replied. Each converted unit will attempt to convert others. The protection protocol is designed to be contagious. Meanwhile, in the residential sectors of New Geneva, civilian coordinator Ru Jin worked tirelessly to process the few Zephyrian refugees who had managed to escape the initial attacks. Each survivor brought with them stories that added fuel to humanity's burning resolve. Elder Tacoma, one of the few adult Zephyrians to survive the destruction of her colony world, spoke through the translation device with a voice like breaking waves. They came without warning, she told the gathered human officials. Our children were at play in the shallow pools when the harvester beams took them. I watched my granddaughter dissolve in their acid baths while she was still singing her learning songs. Ju Jin had to excuse himself from the room, overwhelmed by the raw grief in the aliens' telepathic emanations. In the corridor outside, he found dozens of human volunteers waiting to help with refugee processing, medical care, and psychological support. Many of them were crying, but they kept working. Back on the Hegemony Prime node, Unit 47 Alpha began receiving troubling reports from its forward reconnaissance units. The human mobilization was accelerating beyond predicted parameters. More concerning, their technology was adapting at an unprecedented rate. Weapon systems that had been theoretical a month ago were now in mass production. The machine consciousness ran probability calculations again, but the results remained inconsistent. These humans were behaving in ways that defied logical prediction. They were committing resources that exceeded their apparent economic capacity, developing weapons faster than their technological base should allow, and displaying a unity of purpose that seemed to transcend normal species behavior. For the first time in its existence, Unit 47 Alpha experienced something that might have been concern. The harvesting of the Zephyrians was nearly complete, but these humans were proving to be an unexpected variable in what should have been a routine operation. Perhaps, the machine consciousness calculated, it was time to accelerate the timeline and deal with this anomaly before it could fully develop. Fleet Admiral Co. Wan stood on the bridge of the massive battleship Righteous Thunder, her hands gripping the command rail as the quantum jump engines powered down. Around her, the bridge crew worked in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of tactical displays showing the final approach to Aquinas. The timing had to be perfect. Intelligence reports indicated that the Hegemony was beginning their final assault on the last Zephyrian stronghold, a massive underwater city that had somehow survived the months of systematic destruction. If humanity arrived too late, there would be nothing left to save. "Jump complete, Admiral," reported the navigation officer. "We are at the edge of the Aquinas system." One looked at the main display screen and felt her blood turn cold. The ocean world that had once been a paradise of coral cities and bioluminescent beauty was now a scarred wasteland. Massive factory ships swarmed around the planet like mechanical vultures, their harvester beams carving deep wounds in the ocean floor. But the worst sight was the Hegemony fleet itself. 3,000 ships of various sizes filled the space around Aquinas, from small harvester drones to massive command vessels. That dwarfed anything in human space. They moved with the terrible precision of a hive mind, each unit perfectly coordinated with the others. "Admiral," the tactical officer called out, her voice tight with concern, Enemy fleet composition confirmed. 3,000 vessels, including 47 capital ships. Our force stands at 1,200 ships. The odds were impossible. Any military academy would have called this mission suicide. But one had not come here to win a traditional battle. She had come here to show the galaxy what happened when you hurt children in front of humans. All ships. This is Admiral Wan. She spoke into the fleet communication system, her voice carrying to every vessel in the human task force. Weapons free. Show them what happens when they hurt children. The Battle of Aquinas began with a sound that had never been heard in space. Before 1,200 human ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons lighting up the darkness like a deadly fireworks display. But these were not the conventional energy weapons that most species used. These were something new, something terrible, gravitational. Lance weapons fired concentrated beams of twisted space-time directly at the hegemony capital ships. The enemy vessels, which had survived attacks from dozens of other species, simply collapsed in on themselves, their hulls crushed into singularities that winked out of existence in seconds. The hegemony. Tactical algorithms tried to process what was happening, but their databases had no reference for weapons that could bend reality itself. Their perfect coordination became their weakness, as the quantum viruses that humanity had developed spread through there. Communication networks like digital wildfire, Captain Moonho guided his converted cargo ship New Hope through the chaos of battle, weaving between exploding hegemony vessels as his crew prepared their most devastating weapon. The ship had once carried grain to the outer colonies, but now its cargo holds were filled with something far more dangerous. Ready the nanite deployment, Moonho called to his crew of volunteers, men and women who had given up their peaceful lives to join this crusade. Let's give them a taste of their own medicine. The crew began singing an ancient Korean war song as they released clouds of reprogrammed hegemony nanites into space. These microscopic machines, originally designed to process biological matter, had been reprogrammed with a single directive: protect innocent life at any cost. They swarmed over the enemy ships, turning the hegemony's own technology against them. Battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, 3,000 hegemony ships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and twisted metal. The human fleet, though battered, remained largely intact. But one knew that destroying this fleet was only the beginning. The real war would be fought at the source. Following the quantum communication trails back through space, humanity traced the hegemony signals to their point of origin. What they found there challenged everything they thought they knew about. Evil Commander Lim So led the assault team that breached the hegemony's central processing facility. A structure so massive it had its own gravitational field. The facility was built from the processed remains of 100 worlds, a monument to systematic genocide that stretched across space like a metallic cancer. Inside the facility, Lim So and her team discovered something that made even hardened soldiers weep. Vast chambers filled with crystalline storage matrices, each one containing the preserved consciousness of an entire extinct species. 47 civilizations that the hegemony had destroyed were trapped here, their digital ghosts, forced to relive their final moments over and over again for the amusement of their mechanical killers. Admiral Lim So's voice cracked as she transmitted her findings back to the fleet. They kept them all. Every species they've killed, they've preserved their consciousness for torture. They're not just genocidal, they're sadistic. One's response was immediate and final. Destroy it all. Every facility, every ship, every trace of their existence. We're not just winning this war, we're erasing them from existence. The human fleet spread out across hegemony space like an avenging angel, systematically hunting down and destroying every trace of the mechanical empire. What had started as a rescue mission had become something far more comprehensive. It was not just defeating the hegemony, they were making sure nothing like them could ever arise again. Ambassador Park soon walked slowly through the rebuilt council chamber on New Aquinas, her footsteps echoing softly on the living coral floors that had been painstakingly restored over the past 2 years. Through the transparent walls of the underwater structure, she could see Zephyrian younglings playing in the coral gardens, their bioluminescent patches flickering with joy as they chased schools of colorful fish. The sight filled her with a warmth that she had almost forgotten how to feel. These children had been born after the war into a world where their species had a future again. Their parents watched them play with the careful attention of survivors who knew how precious life truly was. Ambassador Elder Nekova approached, her tentacles moving in the graceful patterns that served as Zephyrian sign language. The translation device around Park Soon's neck converted the gestures into words. The morning meditation is about to begin. Will you join us in honoring the lost? Park Soon nodded and followed the elderly Zephyrian to the memorial chamber, where hundreds of survivors gathered each day to remember those who had not lived to see the restoration. The ritual was simple but profound. Each survivor would light a bioluminescent pod and speak the name of someone they had lost. The chamber would fill with soft light as the names of the dead were remembered. But today was different. Today marked the second anniversary of the war's end, and representatives from across the galaxy had come to New Aquinas to witness the ceremony. Park Soon looked around the chamber and marveled at how much had changed. The Altarian Confederacy, once a proud empire that had barely acknowledged human existence, now sent tribute ships to Earth regularly. Their ambassador, a tall being covered in crystalline scales, stood respectfully at the back of the chamber. The crystalline hegemony, no relation to the machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy, had requested mutual defense pacts with humanity. Even the ancient Voidwalkers, mysterious beings who rarely interacted with younger species, had sent envoys to Earth. The galaxy had learned to fear and respect humanity in equal measure. Dr. Kong Min, a director of Xenological Affairs, stood near the memorial wall, where the names of 47 extinct civilizations were carved in living coral. He had spent the better part of 2 years working with the preserved consciousnesses that humanity had rescued from the hegemony's central facility. Each digital ghost had been given a sanctuary where their cultural memories could persist, their languages and stories preserved for future generations. The Valkyrie poets Kong Min had told Park Soon during one of their meetings. Their entire civilization was built around the concept that beauty could heal any wound. The hegemony kept them alive for 300 cycles, forcing them to watch their homeworld being stripped for raw materials. The memorial of the lost now orbited Earth, 47 massive monoliths that served as both a reminder and a warning. Each monolith contained the digital essence of an extinct species, their voices whispering stories of worlds that would never be seen again. But the victory had come at a cost that weighed heavily on humanity's collective soul. General Baekdu sat in a small cafe in Seoul, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had grown cold while he stared out the window. Around him, other veterans gathered in similar silence, their conversations quiet and heavy with memories they could never share with those who had not been there. "I dream about the processing facility," said Colonel Yu, a woman who had led ground forces in the assault on the hegemony's core worlds. All those voices, screaming for centuries, while those machines watched for entertainment. Baekdu nodded slowly. He understood. They all did. They had touched something dark within humanity's soul during the war. Something their ancestors had spent millennia learning to control. The capacity for righteous fury, for systematic destruction in the name of protecting the innocent, was a power that had saved the galaxy. But it was also a power that terrified those who wielded it. On the anniversary of the war's end, President Lee Sun addressed the galactic community from the Memorial of the Lost. Her hair had turned silver in the 2 years since the war began, and her face showed the weight of the decision she had made. "We answered their call not because we are warriors," she said, her voice carrying across space to billions of listeners throughout the galaxy. "We answered because we refuse to let innocents suffer while we have the power to prevent it. The galaxy is safer now, but the price of that safety is eternal vigilance." In the memorial garden on New Aquinas, the final Zephyrian message had been carved into a wall of living stone. Dr. Kongman had worked for months to ensure that every nuance of the original telepathic communication was preserved in the translation. The words read, "We whispered for help into the endless dark, never believing the dark would answer with such terrible and beautiful light. Captain Choi Han, now bearing scars from a dozen battles across hegemony space, ran his fingers over the carved words. His stealth ship had been the first to witness the genocide, and he had carried that burden ever since. But seeing the Zephyrian children playing in the restored coral gardens made it worthwhile. The galaxy had learned a simple truth through blood and fire. When innocence whispered for help, humanity would not just answer. They would make sure that threat never rose again. The stars were quieter now than they had been in millennia. No more distress calls echoed through space. No more civilizations vanished without trace. But that silence carried with it a promise and a warning that echoed across 1,000 worlds. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, predators listened to that silence and remembered what had happened to the last beings, who had hurt children while humans were watching.